that the lion visits his dying benefactor. What happens next is incredible. The roar echoed through the corridors of Riverside General Hospital, a sound so out of place that the night shift nurses froze in their tracks. The receptionist dropped the phone, leaving the caller speaking into the void. A second roar, closer and more powerful, caused the security guard to draw his weapon with trembling hands. No one was prepared for what they saw when they turned toward the main entrance. An adult lion with a dark mane advancing purposefully through the lobby, completely ignoring the staff and the few patients who, at 2:37 in the morning, were moving through the area. Most disturbing wasn't the presence of the big cat itself, but its behavior. It showed no signs of aggression or disorientation, as one would expect from a wild animal in a human environment. On the contrary, it walked with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where they're going. Its amber eyes, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, scanned the signs on the walls, as if searching for a specific room. "Good Lord! A lion!" a nurse finally shouted, breaking the spell of disbelief that had kept everyone motionless. Chaos erupted immediately. Patients and staff ran for shelter, triggering alarms and closing doors. The guard, unable to decide whether to shoot an animal that, although dangerous, had shown no threatening behavior, opted to back slowly toward the security room while speaking into his radio. "Control, we have a lion in the main lobby. No, I'm not joking or drunk. A real lion, big with a mane and everything. It's heading toward the east wing." The lion, oblivious to the panic it had unleashed, did indeed turn toward the east wing corridor, where the palliative care rooms were located. Its walk was strangely silent for a creature of its size. Only the soft brush of its paws against the linoleum betrayed its advance. 15 miles away, at the Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, Dr. Jabari Wilson received the call he had been dreading since he noticed the absence of Simba, the sanctuary's dominant male lion. Jabari, a veterinarian and founder of the sanctuary, had dedicated the last 20 years of his life to rescuing big cats from circuses, illegal zoos, and private collectors. Simba had been his first rescue, and in many ways, the animal that had defined his mission. "Are you absolutely sure it's him?" asked Jabari, frantically searching for his truck keys. "I don't know, sir," replied the guard's agitated voice. "I'm not an expert on lions, but this one has a large scar that crosses the right side of its muzzle." Jabari closed his eyes with a mixture of confirmation and desperation. The scar was unmistakable. Simba had received it during his rescue from a circus where he was brutally mistreated. It was him, without a doubt. But how had he escaped from an enclosure specifically designed to contain an animal of his size and strength? More importantly, why had he traveled 15 miles to the hospital? The answer to this last question hit Jabari with sudden, painful clarity. Dr. Marshall, Thomas Marshall, the veterinarian who had saved Simba when the lion arrived at the sanctuary on the brink of death so many years ago. Thomas, who had spent countless nights with the big cat, treating his infected wounds, bottle-feeding him when he was too weak to eat on his own. Thomas, who was now in the terminal stage of cancer, admitted to the palliative care wing of Riverside General Hospital. "I'm on my way," said Jabari, starting his truck. "Please tell everyone not to shoot him. Simba won't attack anyone if he doesn't feel threatened. I'll be there in 20 minutes." At the hospital, the situation had escalated to a total emergency. The municipal police had been alerted, as well as animal control services, although none of the latter had protocols for handling a predator of such magnitude. A partial evacuation of the areas near the sighting was ordered, while the east wing was cordoned off to contain the feline. The lion, however, didn't seem to have any intention of being contained. With disturbing determination, it continued advancing down the hallway, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. Upon reaching a corridor intersection, it turned without hesitation to the left, where a sign indicated rooms 115-130. The head nurse of palliative care, Eleanor Reed, a 60-year-old woman with more than 30 years of experience at the hospital, was updating the night records when she heard the commotion. Her first reaction was one of absolute disbelief. A lion in her hospital? Surely it was some kind of bad joke or misunderstanding. Perhaps someone had brought in a large dog and, in the dimness of the night shift, fatigue had played tricks on whoever raised the alarm. But when the evacuation call came directly to her station, the seriousness of the situation became evident. Her patients, many of them in the final stages of terminal illnesses, couldn't be evacuated quickly without causing them significant suffering. Some were connected to life support machines, others under the effects of powerful sedatives to manage pain. Nurse Reed was in the middle of this terrible dilemma when the unmistakable sound of claws against the floor alerted her attention. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Simba. The lion had stopped on the other side of the nursing station counter, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that gave her goosebumps. A lifetime of medical training screamed at her to run, to seek shelter, to activate the panic alarm under the desk. But something in the animal's posture, in the way it calmly breathed, made her hesitate. She saw no aggression in those eyes, but rather an evaluating, almost deliberative intelligence. For an instant that seemed to stretch to infinity, human and feline studied each other. Then, to Eleanor's absolute amazement, the lion tilted its head slightly to one side, almost as if it were asking something. In an act that she would later find difficult to explain even to herself, Eleanor responded to that gesture instinctively. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The lion made a low sound between a growl and a purr and turned its head toward the corridor leading to the rooms. Understanding hit Eleanor like an electric shock. She then remembered the photographs adorning the bedside table in room 122, where Dr. Thomas Marshall had been admitted 3 weeks ago. Images of the veterinarian with various wild animals, and prominently, one where he appeared next to a young lion, bottle feeding it. Thomas had spoken proudly of his work at the sanctuary during his lucid moments, especially mentioning a lion named Simba that he had rescued from deplorable conditions. It was impossible, absolutely impossible. And yet, "Are you looking for Dr. Marshall?" she asked, feeling the unreality of her own words. For Thomas." The reaction was immediate. The lion's eyes visibly dilated upon hearing the name, and a soft sound escaped its throat. It took a step forward, then stopped, as if waiting for an indication. Eleanor Reed made at that moment the most irrational decision of her 30-year medical career. She came out from behind the counter and, maintaining a prudent distance but showing no fear, pointed toward the corridor. "Room 122. Third door on the right." The lion looked at her for a long second, and then, as if it had perfectly understood her words, advanced in the indicated direction. Eleanor followed at a distance she hoped was safe, while discreetly taking her phone to alert security about the animal's exact location. She didn't want anyone to get hurt, not even the lion, but she also couldn't ignore the extraordinary event she was witnessing. In room 122, Thomas Marshall dozed under the effects of morphine. At 72, the veterinarian had fought a long battle against pancreatic cancer that had finally won the war. Doctors estimated he had days, perhaps hours, left. His family had been with him until late that night, but had finally left to rest, promising to return first thing in the morning. The sound of the door opening didn't wake him immediately. It was the smell that penetrated the fog of painkillers, a wild, musky aroma, intensely familiar to someone who had spent decades working with wildlife. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dimness of the room, illuminated only by the faint glow of medical monitors. The silhouette outlined against the light from the hallway wasn't human. It was large, powerful, with a head crowned by a thick mane. For a moment, Thomas thought he was dreaming or hallucinating, common side effects of his medication. But when the lion, because that's undoubtedly what it was, advanced toward his bed with careful steps, the veterinarian knew he was awake. No dream could reproduce with such fidelity the sound of those paws on the floor, the rhythm of that breathing, the characteristic smell of that fur. "Simba," he whispered, his voice weak from illness. "Is that you, boy?" The lion emitted a soft growl of recognition and approached until it was beside the bed. With surprising gentleness for a creature of its size, it rested its enormous head on the edge of the mattress at the height of Thomas's arm. Outside, in the hallway, Eleanor Reed contemplated the scene through the half-open door, her hand still holding the phone with which she had been about to alert security. What she saw defied all logic, all previous experience in her decades of nursing. The lion showed no aggression whatsoever. On the contrary, its behavior was almost reverential. Thomas raised a trembling hand and placed it on the animal's mane. His fingers, weakened by illness, were lost among the rough, dark hair. "You've come to say goodbye," he murmured, with a peaceful smile forming on his emaciated face. "After all these years, you've come to say goodbye." A solitary tear rolled down the old man's cheek, getting lost in the white beard that had grown during his hospitalization. Simba remained motionless, allowing his former savior's hand to caress him, his amber eyes fixed on the face of the man who, so many years ago, had given him a second chance. Eleanor watched, unable to intervene in such an intimate and extraordinary moment. Part of her knew she should alert security that a wild predator had no place in a hospital, but another part, perhaps the most human, recognized the profound connection she was witnessing, a connection that transcended the barriers between species. Her reflections were interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Dr. Jabari Wilson appeared at the end of the hallway, escorted by 2 security guards and a police officer. Seeing the nurse by the half-open door of room 122, he quickened his pace. "Is he in there?" he asked in an urgent whisper. "Is Simba in there?" Eleanor nodded, putting a finger to her lips to indicate silence. "He's with Dr. Marshall," she explained quietly. "He hasn't shown any aggressive behavior. In fact," Jabari cautiously peered through the half-open door. The scene he saw left him speechless. Simba, the fierce lion that had terrified even experienced handlers during his first years at the sanctuary, was now next to Thomas's bed, his head resting near the old man's arm, receiving his caresses with absolute docility. The veterinarian was speaking to him in a low voice, words that Jabari couldn't distinguish from the distance, but whose affectionate tone was unmistakable. "Incredible," he murmured. "He traveled 15 miles to get here. He must have followed his scent, or perhaps—" He stopped, unable to formulate a rational explanation for the feline's behavior. "How did he escape?" asked Eleanor. "I don't know," admitted Jabari. "His enclosure was intact, with no signs of damage. It's as if someone had let him out, but all our security protocols functioned correctly. The cameras don't show anyone near his area." The conversation was interrupted by a sound from the room. Thomas had begun to cough, a strong episode that shook his weakened body. To the observers' amazement, Simba backed up a few steps, giving space, but without taking his gaze off the sick man. When the coughing fit subsided, Thomas made a weak gesture toward the bedside table, where there was a glass of water. And then the most extraordinary thing so far happened. Simba followed the direction of his gaze, approached the table, and with amazing care, gently pushed the glass with his muzzle, bringing it closer to the edge where Thomas could reach it. Jabari suppressed an exclamation of surprise. In his years working with big cats, he had never witnessed such a clear demonstration of understanding, so apparently deliberate. Simba wasn't simply responding to trained commands. He was interpreting a need and acting accordingly. "We need to go in," he finally said, addressing both Eleanor and the guards and the police officer. I need to take him back to the sanctuary before someone panics and does something drastic, but I ask that you let me do it my way. Simba trusts me, and any aggressive approach could frighten him. Eleanor nodded, indicating to the guards to stay back. The police officer, a young man clearly out of his element, agreed with visible relief not to have to directly confront the lion. Jabari took a deep breath and pushed the door to enter the room. Hearing the sound, Simba turned his head sharply, an instinctive alert reaction. Upon recognizing Jabari, however, the feline visibly relaxed, though he maintained his position next to Thomas. "Hello, friend," said Jabari softly, advancing with slow, fluid movements. "I see you've come to visit Dr. Marshall." Thomas, who had been absorbed in his interaction with the lion, seemed to notice Jabari's presence for the first time. "Jabari," he greeted weakly. "Look who's come to see me, after all these years." "I see, Thomas," replied Jabari, cautiously approaching the bed. "It's extraordinary. He traveled miles to find you." A smile formed on the old man's wasted face. "He was always the smartest, from when he was a cub. Remember how he used to open the cages of the others when we started the sanctuary? We had to change the locking systems 3 times. Jabari nodded, remembering those chaotic early days when they were trying to establish the sanctuary with more will than resources. Thomas had been his mentor, the experienced veterinarian who had taught him everything about caring for big cats. "I need to take him back, Thomas," said Jabari gently. "There are police and security personnel outside. They're being patient now, but we can't risk—" "I know," interrupted Thomas, his voice suddenly clearer. "I just wanted to say goodbye." He directed his gaze towards Simba, caressing his mane again. "It has been an honor to know you, my friend. Thank you for coming." The lion emitted a soft sound, almost a purr, and pressed his head slightly against the veterinarian's hand, as if understanding that this was a final farewell. Jabari took from his pocket a small device that he normally used to train the sanctuary's felines, a clicker and some special treats. The familiar sound immediately caught Simba's attention. "Come on, boy," he said in a firm but kind voice. "It's time to go home." To everyone's relief, Simba responded to the call, slowly moving away from the bed. Before following Jabari, however, the lion stopped and turned his head toward Thomas one last time. The old man smiled, weakly raising his hand in a gesture of farewell. "Take care, Simba," he whispered. "And take care of Jabari. He's a good man." Jabari felt a lump in his throat. This scene, this connection between his dying mentor and the first animal they had rescued together, was more emotional than he had anticipated. With an effort, he maintained the professional composure that the situation required. "I'll be back tomorrow, Thomas," he promised. "Rest." With careful directions and the help of the clicker, Jabari guided Simba out of the room, down the hall, and toward the exit where his specially equipped truck was waiting. The entire hospital seemed to hold its breath as the man and the lion advanced in perfect synchrony, as if performing a choreographed dance that both knew by instinct. To Jabari's surprise, Simba voluntarily entered the transport cage of the truck, without the resistance he normally showed during veterinary checkups or transfers. It was as if, having fulfilled his purpose, he was ready to return home. The return to Oak Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary took place in reflective silence. Jabari couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. How had Simba escaped? How had he found the hospital? How had he specifically located Thomas's room among hundreds? No rational explanation seemed satisfactory. Upon arrival, all the sanctuary staff were waiting for them, alerted by Jabari's calls during the journey. The process of returning Simba to his enclosure was carried out without incident, although Jabari ordered a complete review of all security systems to determine how he had managed to escape. Thomas Marshall passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family. Among his last coherent words, according to his daughter, was a reference to "my dark-maned friend who came to say goodbye." The family attributed it to delirium caused by pain medication. Only Eleanor Reed, Jabari Wilson, and a few witnesses from the hospital knew the extraordinary truth. A week after the incident, the investigation into Simba's escape yielded perplexing results. All locks were working correctly. The security cameras showed no intruders. The sanctuary's perimeter showed no damage. It was as if the lion had simply disappeared from a closed enclosure and reappeared miles later at the hospital. Simba's behavior had also subtly changed since his visit to Thomas. The caretakers reported that he seemed calmer, more contemplative, if such a description could be applied to a wild feline. He spent long hours observing the horizon in the direction of the hospital and occasionally emitted deep roars at sunset, as if sending some message across the distance. A month after Thomas's death, during a particularly intense storm, the mystery took a new turn. Jabari was awakened at midnight by the sanctuary's security alarms. Upon arriving at the monitoring center, the guards showed him the camera images. The door to Simba's enclosure was open, and the lion was nowhere to be found. This time, however, the cameras had captured something extraordinary. Moments before the door opened, a strong electrical discharge, presumably lightning, had struck near the enclosure. In the recording, a blinding flash could be observed, followed by interference. When the image stabilized, the door was open, with no signs of physical damage. It was as if the electricity had temporarily deactivated the electronic security systems. Jabari immediately organized a search team, fearing that the lion might head again toward populated areas. After hours of searching the surroundings under the torrential rain, one of the teams reported having seen Simba in the municipal cemetery. When Jabari arrived at the location, the scene he found left him speechless. Simba was sitting next to a freshly covered grave, his fur soaked by the rain, apparently indifferent to the storm battering the region. Lightning momentarily illuminated the area, allowing Jabari to read the inscription on the headstone. Dr. Thomas Marshall, 1951-2023, lover of all creatures, great and small. The lion raised his gaze upon sensing Jabari's presence, but made no move to leave. His eyes reflected an intelligence and emotion that defied any scientific explanation. Man and beast remained thus, observing each other in the rain, united by the memory of the man who had saved one and taught the other. Eventually, Jabari approached and sat in silence next to the lion. He didn't try to put a leash on him or guide him back to the truck. He simply shared that moment of mourning, that strange and powerful bond that transcended conventional human understanding. When dawn finally broke, Simba rose of his own volition and began walking toward the cemetery exit. Jabari followed at a respectful distance, observing how the lion occasionally stopped to look back, as if making sure he was following. Together they returned to the truck, and Simba entered the transport cage again without resistance. Back at the sanctuary, Jabari made a decision he knew Thomas would have approved. He moved Simba to a new enclosure, one located on the highest hill of the property, from where the city could be seen in the distance. It was a larger and more enriched space, with rocks arranged in a way that allowed the lion to comfortably observe the horizon. In the years that followed, there were occasional sightings of a lion in the vicinity of the cemetery, always during intense electrical storms. The authorities were never able to confirm these reports, and Jabari always assured that all his animals were properly secured. However, the sanctuary employees noticed that after each of these storms, Simba would return to his enclosure soaked and with dirt on his paws. The story of the lion who visited his dying benefactor became a local legend. Some dismissed it as a fantastic elaboration of more mundane facts. Others especially those who had been present that night at the hospital, knew they had witnessed something that defied rational understanding, a bond between species that transcended the barriers of language, logic, and perhaps even life and death. Each year, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, Jabari visited his grave, always bringing a bouquet of wildflowers and a tuft of dark hair from Simba's mane. And each year, he found mysterious lion tracks in the moist earth next to the headstone, as if someone else had been there before him, keeping alive the promise of a friendship that not even death could dissolve.